Hello, I'm Kenny Yates, and this is Nuggets of Truth. And tonight, I want to share with you new wines and old wineskins. I'm going to attempt to explain what Jesus meant about putting new wine in old wineskins. We'll take our text tonight from Matthew chapter 9, verse 14 through 17. Then the disciples of John came to him, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved." This isn't really a parable per se, but rather a metaphor that Jesus used to communicate the coming of a new age, a new dispensation, and a new covenant. The Mosaic covenant, Old Covenant, or Judaism, was soon passing away, only to be replaced with a new and better covenant, according to the Hebrew writer, Hebrews chapter 8, verse 6 through 13. First, we have to understand the Old Testament, John the Baptist, and the New Covenant. The Old Covenant was rules and regulations and rituals. Worshippers did not have a personal relationship with God, but instead went through a man like themselves known as the high priest. It was a veiled religion, one that was impossible to keep, since it was impossible to see clearly through veiled eyes. Now John was the one prophesied about, saying, "Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you." John the Baptist was the bridge between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Yet his eyes and his disciples' eyes were still veiled, since the veil can only be taken away or lifted by Christ himself. And we find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 14. Paul, writing to the Corinthian church, stated that every time the Old Covenant is read, that same veil remains unlifted, and thus hardens their heart or harden their mind. But John came preaching repentance and baptizing, bridged the gap, making a way for the new covenant to be received. You see, God never brings sudden and drastic changes. He never rushes the time to learn to cope with and to accept the new changes. He doesn't rush into it. Example, coming out of Egypt, the Exodus, he didn't lead them through the shortest way, because he thought if they faced war, they would return to Egypt. And you can find that in Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. Another example would be the Old Testament stated an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, etc. That seems harsh, but it was really the beginning of mercy. How? Because before that, every man did as he saw fit. There was no laws, no rules, no regulations governing their actions. For instance, Lamech killed a man just for injuring him and thought he was justified in doing so. That was the law of the land. If you hurt me, I will do something to you even worse, maybe kill you. And if you kill someone or someone's family member, I will kill your whole family. And here God comes along and says, enough is enough. You can only take justice as far as doing to them only what they did to you. Which means, like, okay, if they knocked out your eye, you couldn't go and take both eyes. Or if they knocked out one tooth, you couldn't go ahead and then cut off their arm. No, you could only do to them as far as they was done to you. You had to show mercy up to that point. But he said, but a time will come when you will not only forgive hurts, but you will love your enemy. That would never go over in that society where they had no rules, no regulations. So God had to introduce an eye for an eye before he can introduce love your enemy. You see how God took them and the reasoning behind an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So it's not that God's heart was hardened, but man's heart was hardened. So God was trying to lead them in a direction of mercy. One more example. Divorce. Matthew chapter 19, verse 3 through 5 records the Pharisees trying to trap Jesus. They asked him if it was lawful to divorce your wife for any and every reason. And then they said, so why did Moses institute a certificate of divorce? Jesus said, it was not God's plan for divorce, but the law was written because of the hardness of man's heart. So again, God was easing wicked man into mercy and into holiness. Because his heart was so hard, he had to ease them in and do one step at a time so that they could learn to cope with the changes. All right, the new covenant. The new covenant is based on better promises through God, Jesus Christ himself. Since the old covenant brought death, the new covenant brought life. God said he would write his new law not on tablets of stone like the Old Testament, but rather on hearts and mind. Therefore, Jesus had to die physically, thus breaking through the veil, which is his body, to let us into the very presence of God. Now we can gaze upon his beauty with unveiled faces to behold the glory of the Lord. Now the children of the bride chamber is referring to Christians, or rather Christ followers, and the bridegroom is Jesus. The new cloth and new wine is the new covenant. Old garment and old wineskins are Jesus' disciples. Jesus was trying to explain that his disciples were in training and had not yet made the conversion over. So they were tender, and if too much was forced on them, they, like the Israelites departing Egypt, might turn back. The best illustration is the new wine, since it is the easiest for us to understand. The word new wine denotes a wine still in the fermenting stage, thus still expanding. Now, if this new wine is poured into old wineskin, the law or the old way of doing things, the expanding wine would break it and both would be destroyed. But if new wine, the love teaching of Jesus, was put into new wineskins, the newly regenerated disciples, both would expand together and both would be preserved, and the good news will be as it has passed down from generation to generation. Again, this is Kenny Yates, and I hope that you enjoyed this session. New wine in old wineskins. Be blessed and stay blessed.